It's not us that are just saying it. It is the US, it is the IMF, it is the World Bank, it is the world that are saying, listen, South Africa has become the new gateway to terror. And now, Chris, we better wake up, because if we don't, the absolute terror now being cast in Mozambique, without a doubt, the horrific deaths and killings in DRC are going to come to roost in this country. And it's not doom and gloom. It's not spreading fear. It's a fact.
Neil, according to a SAPS whistleblower, 2 years ago, 2 memory sticks with information on so-called secret military training camps in South Africa was handed to state security. When that whistleblower tried to follow up, she was blocked.
I think it's 8 years ago that you can go when the first algorithm of people saying that the fundamentalism of ISIS, ISIL, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram are here. When you make a fundamental statement that grouping of, call it Islamic fundamentalism, has come to the border, it doesn't take allegedly, it doesn't take maybe, and no assumption. You just have to go and look at the pattern, what has happened in Mozambique, specifically in the north of Mozambique, where I visited, called Pemba, where we had a direct confrontation with what they called ISIL-M, or ISIS-M, ISIS Mozambique, where we had horrific matters of beheadings, slaughter, and attack of a group that actually took over the north side of Mozambique. That was the first sign. The continual attacks of Al-Shabaab in Kenya, attacking a mall, destroying civilian life. And then obviously the stand-up war in the north in Nigeria, where you also had the breakaways of Boko Haram, the ISIS ideology. We know for a fact, and we should move from allegedly to really, that they live amongst us. The current scenario of people warning, giving red flags, and saying that South Africa is becoming a portal, a scenario point of entry for these kinds of crimes, terror, is no more debatable. So here we sit with a sporadic explanation of a training camp found next to White River in Mpumalanga, under the auspices that it is SIRA registered and only for security training. And I'd like to explain that, Chris, why that is laughable. But that it is there is clear. And we are still now using the words apparently, maybe. But I will give a feather to the cap, to the police, and to the entities that today they reacted and they were on site. But something's wrong.
Well, 95 Libyans were arrested. Where were they going to be deployed as security guards, Neil?
So you look at the video, people like myself that come from there, and you look at the training camp facility. Let's quickly discuss one thing. A security guard, which they say the 95 people were there for. They were there for security guard training. What the hell are the kinds of security premises these people are going to protect? Rubbish. So let me go through it. There is a place, and you can see the minister, the new minister, Mchulu, and the national commissioner walking with a camera crew, and you can see there is what we call a live scenario setup. It is a S-shaped trench covered with sandbag leading up to an underground bunker. Now, I don't know what kind of training a security guard needs to defend a line of trench warfare and underground bunkers. So you can fool some of the time, but not all of the time. The kind of uniform, the kind of discussion, I saw them practicing house clearing. I saw them practicing shoot and move. This is not a normal security guard training, unless this security is being done in the middle of either Iraq, Iran, or Afghanistan. Rubbish. This was a camp, in my opinion, allegedly set up to train people for war. And that's that.
Well, Neil, stories about training camps in various locations in South Africa have popped up sporadically. Yet, we have not seen any action to shut down these camps or to expose them. Why not?
I'll tell you why not. Chris, there's two things. One, when intelligence services work, they work in something called a spider web. The spider web, the best explanation is join the dots. You are afraid with that when people say join the dots. So we call it spider web. So what happens is we go from one person and then you start linking to whom this person speaks to, what do they speak about, where do they speak, and why do they speak. So what happens is the intelligence services have a way of starting electronically, cyber-wise, to draw a spider web of the people that a suspected terrorist, a suspected fundamentalist, a suspected cartel member, who they talk to. And at the end of the day, when you sit back, you have the full picture of a spider web. The problem, Chris, is not creating the tracking of the spider web. The problem is when you start taking and joining the dots of the spider web, and oopsie, you find that someone in that spider web is a person of note, is a person of power, or a person of very high esteem. And now the question would normally come from the field operators to say, we have just got this individual in the spider web. What do? Normally, you escalate the information to the next level and to the next level. Chris, there is then where the fundamental choice must come about honor, about patriotism, about justice. And in my opinion, 98% of the time, that is where that thing then gets collapsed. It gets told to no further continue and to withdraw. This is not a South African problem. This is a global problem in all intelligence services. When you stumble on something and it is becoming too sensitive, we've had that in this country. I will remind you that the Scorpions were doing their job, Chris, too well. And they shot them, allegedly.
Well, Neil, the US State Security Department has now sanctioned 2 ISIS-linked operatives in South Africa. The one has been moving money to the DRC, people between Uganda and South Africa. And the other one has been involved in other activities linked to far-flung terror operations. So have you looked at that statement from the US?
Yes, I received it from those individuals. And again, Chris, you can walk with a long stick and beating the grass and hope that only certain things pop out. But when you beat grass in a veld, when a snake, anaconda, cobra, or black mamba jumps out, don't be surprised. So here's the thing, Chris. You cannot deny that South Africa is becoming a hub, a center, a logistical conduit to terror. Now, in my last discussion, and in my discussion this week with several authorities, I made it very clear that the level of cartel movement, the level of drug shipping, the level of armament, the level of training, the level of cash flow is not just being said by current authority. The United States of America, who has for ambient time fought terror, fought cartels and fundamentalism in every part of the globe, has recognized that there are certain individuals currently residing in this country of ours that don't just speak to terrorists, engage with terrorists, but are funding them. Now, here's a statement, Chris. If you look at the current, and I'm saying where another flag came, when you look at the current, call it spaza shops, call it Somalian shops, call it those shops that were around, I'm quoting verbatim from an article, that certain of these businesses whom are unregistered, illegally occupied, and only work with cash are currently being investigated for funding matters of fundamental terrorism in Africa via MoneyGram, via Telegram, via many methods that you move money. And Chris, that is why 2 years ago, South Africa was put on the grey list. They were put on the grey list because the globe and the financial services of the world said, your financial system in this country is absolutely not controlled and cannot be trusted. Now, how many, Chris, more tick boxes do you want to say to the South African authorities, hey, word wakker? It's not us that are just saying it. It is the US, it is the IMF, it is the World Bank, it is the world that are saying, listen, South Africa has become the new gateway to terror. And now, Chris, we better wake up. Because if we don't, the absolute terror now being cast in Mozambique, without a doubt, the horrific deaths and killings in DRC are going to come to roost in this country. And it's not doom and gloom. It's not spreading fear. It's a fact.
Yo, guys, I was really alerted to that video with the Libyan nationals and the camps, the sort of like training camps went with also Minister of Police Senzo Mchunu giving comments after the raid at that camps where I was reported that there were Libyan nationals, it sort of like represented the training ground. And, I think that I even saw the SABC video where it appeared that, there were bunks, beds, there were even places for cooking and all that. So it felt like as a mini city in its way, with a different tent. Their housings were in tents, right? And then there was a different tent with a gym where most of the people would actually have exercises daily and all that. And for me, it's really interesting because I really don't understand what's making South Africa really attractive to terror training camps, so to speak, because I don't know. I really don't know what it is about South Africa anyway that actually making it really attractive to these Libyans or maybe other terrorists, as Neil Dubier speaks about here, Al-Shabaab and other terrorist groups actually, to which he worked against while he was in active service. But anyway, I saw a really interesting report from a report by the CIA in its briefing on terrorist activity and terrorist training across the world by terrorists from Libya. And I thought it was really interesting to just really go through quickly to really understand the mentality, of terror training, so to speak. And why the choice of South Africa? Why South Africa? What's making South Africa really the choice ground for these Libyan trainees in terror? So the CIA compiled this report about Libyan training camps. Okay. It says that Libya has trained terrorists in the, in country within Libya since the 1970s, and also in addition to the principal facilities in and around Tripoli over the past 2 decades. The Libyans have actually operated smaller training camps dispersed throughout the country. And on some occasions, it says that terrorists have actually trained at Libyan military bases. For example, in 1988, when members of a radical group, I think it's at the Popular Struggle Front, I think it was a Palestinian group, it actually trained an Air Force base in Ozu region. I think this is in Libya. And that members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, we know that PLO with Yasser Arafat, actually also were known to have trained in Libyan military camps. So Libya actually sort of like is well known now to the Americans, and also like this research unit in, I think, in the CIA or something, about its strategy for military training, having military training camps. So I don't know if probably the one in South Africa was one of its wider strategy to spread across Africa, and the choice for South Africa for me is really not yet clear anyway. But anyway, it argues that trainees, it actually also argues that, non-Palestinian groups that have actually also received training in Libya in recent years include the Ecuadorian Alfaro Vive Carajo organization, Colombia's M19, also the Haitian Liberation Organization, the Chilean Manuel Rodriguez Patriotic Front, and also the Armenian Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia, and also the Japanese Red Army have all received training in Libya. Wow! So the guys in Libya are really strategic in their both in intelligence, and for them to have developed a really firm curriculum for training, military training. I think it's something that actually is really interesting for me. The report also argues that trainees from Asia, Latin America, and Africa often go to Libya legally, usually pretending to be students, and sometimes third world nationals travel to Libya for what they believe to be legitimate schooling, such as technical or religious training. Okay, the report now argues that when they arrive, however, they find themselves met at the airport by soldiers, placed on a truck, and transported to a dissident training camp, so to speak. And that, it argues that some of the students, for example, who are hostile to Libyan overtures are usually summarily deported and branded as unworthy students. Okay. Now, it says that extremists travel to Libya using other methods as well. So, for example, there were radicals traveling from Mauritius, traveled to Tripoli in 1987, and they wanted to attend a youth conference. But it says that instead they went to a training camp like this one that was actually found in South Africa. So there were also these incidences of, Libya sponsoring and carrying out, support for international. This is a report saying that Libyan support for international terrorism since 15th of April 1986. So it says that in summer 1990, Libya provided the Haitian Liberation Organization over $20,000 to carry out an attack against the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince, and Haitian officials arrested 2 of the operatives before they could execute the attack. It also says that, on May 1990, the Palestinian Liberation Front members attempted a seaborne raid on Israel, which 4 were killed and 12 were captured, and the Libyans were involved in all aspects of the foiled operation, providing sophisticated equipment, navigational aids, export planning assistance, and weapons used in the attacks. It speaks about March 1990 when a bomb exploded on the second floor of the Hilton Hotel in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and that the blast occurred about 50 meters from the suite occupied by the Israeli ambassador, and that the Ethiopian government subsequently expelled 2 Libyan diplomats for their alleged involvement in the incident. In September 1989, it says a UTA Flight 772 exploded over Niger, killing all 171 passengers and crew on board. And it says that the French investigation concluded that Libya masterminded the operation, which was carried out by the LPB in Brazzaville, Congo, and that the French have issued international arrest warrants for 4 Libyan government officials for their involvement in the attack. It speaks about the fact of also April 1989 when there were 5 people, including 2 Americans, who were injured and several vehicles damaged when a bomb exploded near the main entrance of the U.S.-Costa Rican Binational Cultural Center in San Jose, Costa Rica, and the Santa Maria Patriotic Organization carried out the attack, and its members were trained in Libya. It also speaks about how in December 1988, there was a Pan Am Flight 103 that exploded over Scotland, killing all 259 persons on board, including 189 Americans. 11 of them were killed on the ground of Lockerbie, Scotland, all right? And then July 1988, Abu Nidal Organization, ANO terrorists, attacked the Greek cruise ship, the city of Poros in Greece, with machine guns and hand grenades, and that 9 people were killed and nearly 100 were injured, and the weapons used had been provided by Libya, and 1 terrorist had entered Greece using a Libyan passport. So lots of these incidences are called out by the CIA of showing Libya's involvement in a lot of what it calls or it dubs the CIA dubs as terrorist incursions in different countries, both in Africa and outside of Africa. I think there's this other really interesting ones in Senegal. It says that in February of 1988, 2 known Libyan terrorists, along with a Senegalese national, were arrested in Senegal, Dakar, in possession of explosives and weapons. All right. I'll just go through the cases of countries in Africa so we really understand what really is the drive that makes South Africa really, attractive for this kind of military training, where they found Libyan nationals in this, camp that was just discovered by Senzom Chuno. So it says that in October 1987, a bomb exploded at the office of World Vision, which is a U.S. private voluntary organization in Modu, Chad Republic, but no one was injured. However, it says that the bomb reportedly was placed by terrorists assisted by the Libyan People's Bureau in Cotonou, Benin. There was also another case in Cameroon and Chad. It says that in March 1987, a bomb exploded at the Kusera Bridge, which links Cameroon and Chad. The timer was prematurely set, killing the operative, a Chadian who was working on behalf of the Libyans. Then it also speaks about how, there was one in Djibouti that in March 1987, a bomb exploded at the Café Le History in Djibouti, killing 11 and wounding over 50 people, and the Libyan-supported Popular Struggle Front carried out, it's reported here by this report, says it carried out the attack under the threat of losing Tripoli's financial support, okay? Also in let's see other African countries. So anyway, that was the last African country that was reported in this CIA report on the incursions and the impact of Libyan training camps, Libyan military training camps, and probably terrorist activities across the world, both in Africa and abroad. And so for me, it was really interesting because I don't know why South Africa then became quite an attractive space to discover this training camp, and why many actually are still arguing if this was a military training camp or not. What really does it represent? What does it tell about South Africa? You could hear in the video where the discussion on the whistleblower. The whistleblower who actually approached, I think was a police, I think maybe during Becky Telly's regime, or I don't know if the other one anyway, it was alleged that she presented evidence of training camps or some terrorist activity in South Africa, but it wasn't, there was no action taken against it by the government at the time, and this was the ANC. So it's really tricky anyway how to interpret why South Africa is really becoming attractive. I know Gaten McKenzie speaks about, or I think there was a comment, a video I made here that spoke about how South Africa has most of the headquarters of the gangs and really fierce gangs, in South Africa. So South Africa seems to be a really hotbed, a chosen destination for, the headquarters for most of these groups. And for the reason why is really not yet clear. I don't know if probably is it because of the weakness of the police? Is it because of the thing I explained in my last video, the inherent anger that is incubated within South African society as a result of its history that then kind of like gives fora because their minds now that are really hardened. I explained in my last video how, Peter Cronwald spoke about how South African prisons seem to be hotbeds for creating hardened criminals. And so there have been more hardened criminals released from prison into South African society. And is this the reason why it appears to represent a sort of like a foundation for recruitment or recruitable candidates for most of these violent groups, so to speak, to really carry out activities? So it's really difficult anyway. And we're really hoping that South Africa would not, kind of like become this kind of society that becomes really attractive to terrorism and terrorist training. Because if you go to West Africa, for example, what is actually happening in West Africa with the AES Confederation, the Sahel Confederation that's been formed now by Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, by Captain Assimi Goïta in Mali, and General Chiani Abdrahame of Niger, they formed a Sahel Confederation of those three states to be able to work together and function as one unit, totally leaving behind ECOWAS, which has been a long-term regional body in the region of West Africa for many decades now, and they're now operating as one body. And they claim that now that they're operating as one, their fight against the terrorism that has actually bedeviled the Sahel region, all the while the military camps, the foreign military, the American bases, the French bases have been there, that now they argue, these military generals argue that their fight against terrorism in the region is now more effective with the exit of these foreign military bases, and that they're able to consolidate their forces to be able to have frontal attacks on terrorism. So terrorism is a big threat across Africa. Terrorism, it's really difficult to understand its role, its purpose, what's the function, what's the idea behind the sponsors of terrorism, why destabilize, what's the reason to destabilize peaceful countries, what's the larger objective. It's really difficult to understand. In Nigeria, for example, my country, for example, we were also bedeviled for a long time by Boko Haram. If you remember the news of let the girls go, there was a campaign like that when Boko Haram actually kidnapped some young female students from a school or something like that, you see. And so there was that outcry against Boko Haram. So that was a form of terrorism that reigned in the northern part of Nigeria. So, but we're still seeing springs of terrorism in Uganda, for example. The president President Museveni is actually strong-headed. Actually the Ugandan army has actually been very effective in striking terrorist groups from Al-Shabaab and other groups, around Uganda. Really effective. You see, in that fight. The Ugandan army is really fierce. The Ugandan army has actually even been known to, export protection security services abroad. In that regard. And so terrorism is a really big threat. We saw the attacks of terrorism of Al-Shabaab in Kenya, in recent times. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago when there was this bombing in this school. A really sad event and all that. So we're really hoping that South Africa doesn't become that, it doesn't become a space that will be heralded for terrorists or conducive for terrorist attacks, because I think that will be really bloody and, really, challenge the mandate that the GNU now is trying to forge forward for a united, non-racialist nation state of South Africa. But anyway, I don't know, what do you guys think about Neil DB's speech here and the commentary? Help me, share your thoughts. Let's understand, let's think through together. Why is South Africa becoming more attractive now to terrorist training camps? Why was it even really attractive to this particular camp in the first place that Neil DB speaks about? Share your thoughts in the comments.